I'm 76 years old and the phone in my kitchen hasn't rung in a long time. It still works. I pay the bill every month. I keep it clean. I keep it right where it's always been, like that matters. Some mornings I sit at the table with my coffee and I stare at it like it's going to apologize to me. It doesn't. And I finally understand why my children stopped calling. Not in the way I used to understand it. Not in the way where I made myself the victim and them the problem. I understood it like that for years. I told myself they were busy. I told myself young people don't think about their parents. I told myself it was just the way the world is now, but that wasn't the truth. The truth is uglier and it's quieter. The truth is I trained them to live without me. I didn't do it on purpose. That's what makes it worse. I used to think being a good parent meant working, providing, making sure there was food, clothes, a roof that didn't leak, and a car that started in the winter. And I did those things. I did them well. I didn't drink myself into a mess. I didn't run around. I didn't hit anybody. I came home every night. I paid the mortgage. I thought that was love. I was wrong. When my kids were little, I was already tired. I had that kind of tired that sits behind your eyes and never leaves. I worked at a manufacturing plant for most of my life. The kind of place where the air smells like oil and metal and your hands never really get clean no matter how hard you scrub. I'd wake up before the sun. I'd eat something quick. Eggs if we had them, toast if we didn't. Then I'd drive in the dark, work 10 hours, come home with my back aching, and sit in my chair like it was a life raft. The kids would run up to me sometimes. They'd be excited about something, a drawing, a story from school, a joke they heard. And I'd smile, but my mind would already be somewhere else. Thinking about the bills, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about whether the car would make it another year. I remember my son once tugging on my sleeve, asking me to come outside and throw a ball with him. I said, "Not now, maybe later." I said it so many times it became a kind of background noise in our house. Not now, maybe later. I thought later would always come. My wife tried. God, she tried. She'd say, "They miss you. They want you." And I'd answer with something like, "I'm doing this for them." I really believed that. I believed that being exhausted was proof I was a good man. I didn't realize exhaustion can also be an excuse. My daughter used to sit at the kitchen counter when she was a teenager. She'd talk while I ate dinner. Little things, a teacher she didn't like, a friend who was acting strange, some boy who made her feel nervous. I'd nod. I'd make sounds to show I was listening, but I wasn't really there. I was watching the clock, waiting for the news, waiting for the quiet. Sometimes she'd stop mid-sentence and look at me, like she was checking to see if I noticed her at all. I'd say, "What?" And she'd say, "Nothing." That word nothing is heavy when you look back. I didn't know then that she was learning not to bother. The damage didn't happen in one big fight. It didn't happen because of one cruel thing I said. It happened because of 1,000 small moments where I chose something else. I chose overtime. I chose being right. I chose silence. I chose comfort. I missed school plays. I missed parent nights. I missed birthdays in a way that's hard to explain. I was physically there, but I wasn't really there. I'd show up late, tired, distracted. I'd hand them a gift and tell them I was proud, but I'd be looking at the door like I wanted to leave. I remember my son graduating high school. Everyone was taking pictures. Families were hugging. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, stiff as a fence post. He came over in his cap and gown, smiling, and I said, "Good job." Just like that, good job. He waited a second like he wanted more, like he wanted me to say something that felt like a father, then he nodded and walked away. I told myself he didn't care. I told myself boys don't need all that talking. But he did care. I can see it now. I just didn't know how to give him what he needed. When they grew older, I expected them to come to me. I thought that was how it worked. I thought children were supposed to orbit their parents forever. But I didn't build that kind of home. I built a house where feelings were inconvenient and problems were handled alone. I built a house where you didn't cry unless someone died. And even then, you tried not to. There were little warning signs. I see them clearly now. Back then, I treated them like weather, something passing through. My daughter stopped telling me about her life. She'd come over and talk to her mother, and I'd sit in my chair and watch television. I'd hear laughter from the kitchen, and I'd feel annoyed like it was too loud. Sometimes my wife would call me in and say, "Come talk with us." And I'd say, "In a minute." I never came in a minute. My son moved away for work, another state, not too far, but far enough that visits took planning. At first, he called every Sunday. I remember those calls. They were short. He'd detail me about his job, his apartment, the traffic. I'd ask him if he was saving money, if he was being careful. I didn't ask him if he was happy. After a while, the calls became every other week. Then once a month. Then holidays. I'd complain to my wife. I'd say, "He never calls anymore." And she'd say very softly, "Did you call him?" That made me angry, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. I didn't call him. I waited. I sat in my pride like it was a throne. I told myself it was their job. I told myself I'd earned the right to be reached for. It's a strange thing how you can be lonely and still stubborn. Then my wife got sick. It wasn't sudden. It was another one of those slow things. She started forgetting small things, where she put her keys, what day it was. She'd repeat stories. At first, we laughed about it. We said it was age. Then one day she looked at me across the table and called me by her brother's name. That was the first time I felt real fear in my chest. Not the kind you push down, the kind that changes the air in the room. The diagnosis came later. Alzheimer's. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to ask for help. And suddenly I needed my children. I needed them badly. I called them. I left messages. I tried to sound calm. I tried to sound like I had it under control. My daughter came first. She walked into the house and looked around like she was stepping into a museum of her childhood. She saw her mother sitting quietly, staring at nothing, and I saw something in my daughter's face crack. She helped. She did. She cooked meals. She cleaned. She took her mother to appointments. She stayed longer than she should have, but she didn't talk to me much. Not the way a daughter talks to a father when she feels safe. She spoke politely, like a neighbor. My son came when he could. He flew in for a weekend. He looked exhausted, like he'd been carrying his own life on his shoulders. He hugged his mother, held her hand, and then he looked at me. I expected comfort. I expected him to say, "We'll get through this." Instead, he said, "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" And I didn't have an answer, because the truth was I didn't want to admit I couldn't handle it. I didn't want to feel weak. I didn't want to look like a man who didn't have control of his own home. I watched my children step in and do what I should have been able to do emotionally years ago. They were gentle with their mother. They spoke softly. They sat with her even when she couldn't follow the conversation. And I realized something that hurt worse than her illness. They knew how to be present. They learned it somewhere else, not from me. My wife died 2 years later. She didn't die all at once. She disappeared in pieces. By the end, she didn't know my name. She didn't know the house. She didn't know her own children. When she passed, the funeral was small. My daughter cried quietly. My son stared at the floor. I stood there feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides. Afterward, everyone went back to their lives, and I went back to the house. The silence in this place after you lose someone, it's not like regular silence. It is weight. It sits on your shoulders. It follows you into every room. I started calling my kids more after that. At first, they answered. They were kind. They asked if I was eating, if I was sleeping, but I could hear it in their voices. They were doing it out of duty, like checking a box. And slowly they stopped picking up, not completely. They'd answer once in a while, a holiday, a birthday, but the warmth wasn't there, the closeness wasn't there. And I'd hang up and feel this ache that had no place to go. For a long time, I blamed them. I told myself they were ungrateful. I told myself they didn't understand what I sacrificed. I told myself I did my best, but the older you get, the harder it becomes to lie to yourself. The lies start to feel heavy. They start to feel childish. One night, I found an old photo album, real pictures, the kind you have to hold. There was a picture of my daughter at about 6 years old holding a stuffed rabbit. She was smiling wide, missing teeth. I stared at that picture for a long time, and I tried to remember her voice at that age. I tried to remember what she used to talk about, what she used to ask me, and I realized I couldn't. I couldn't remember because I wasn't listening. That's when it hit me, not like a dramatic revelation, just a quiet understanding that settled in my stomach like a stone. My children didn't stop calling because they hated me. They stopped calling because they didn't feel known. They didn't feel wanted, not really. Not as people, only as responsibilities, as extensions of my pride, as proof that I'd done my job. I gave them a roof, but I didn't give them refuge. I gave them money when I could, but I didn't give them my attention. And attention is what children remember. It's what love feels like when you're young. I thought love was working until your hands bled, but love is sitting down when you're tired. Love is asking questions and waiting for the answers. Love is noticing when someone is hurting and not turning away because it's inconvenient. I didn't do those things, so they learned to stop needing me. And when they grew up, they didn't know how to include me. There wasn't a habit of closeness. There wasn't a foundation. You can't build that in a phone call once a month when they're already grown. You can't patch over 30 years with a few polite conversations. Some things don't break loudly. They just wear down until there's nothing left to hold. Now I sit here in the evenings and I hear the neighbors laughing through the walls. I see families come and go, grandkids running in the yard. And I wonder what it would have been like if I'd been softer, if I'd been less afraid of looking foolish, if I'd put down the newspaper and listened to my daughter talk about that boy, if I'd gone outside and thrown the ball with my son even when my back hurt, if I'd called them first instead of waiting to be honored. It's strange. I spent my whole life thinking I was building something solid, and I did in a way. I built a stable life, but stability isn't warmth. And warmth is what people come back for. If you're listening to this and you still have people who reach for you, who want your time, who want your voice, don't treat it like it's endless. Don't treat it like it's guaranteed. I did. And now I have a quiet house and a silent phone. Sometimes my daughter texts, short messages. Hope you're doing okay. Sometimes my son sends a picture of his kids. I stare at their faces and try to imagine what they sound like. I don't blame my children anymore. They are living the way I taught them to live, without me. And that's the part that stays with you at night, not anger, not bitterness. Just the understanding that the loneliness I feel now didn't arrive by accident. It was built, slowly, carefully, over decades, by me. I don't know how much time I have left. None of us really do, but at 76 you stop pretending you're going to live forever. So I keep the phone on, I keep it clean, I keep it right there on the kitchen wall. And sometimes, when the house is especially quiet, I pick it up and I listen to the dial tone. Not because I expect it to ring, just because it reminds me that I'm still here, and I wish I had been here sooner.